Okay. I know nobody's quite here yet, but this is what I'm having to do to make this work. For whatever reason, YouTube's not cooperating with me. So maybe I can find a shared link. I'm going to type into the original. Okay, going back to here. Okay, at least one person showed up. So we'll go ahead and get started with that. Um, Sorry about that, guys. I have never had trouble trying to stream through YouTube before. I decided to try it this time rather than go through StreamYard like I usually do. But for whatever reason, we'll just make it work through here, and hopefully people will start to join us as we get started. Good morning, guys. Good morning to the people here in the United States that are. Uh, it's Sunday. The rest of you, it's probably afternoon or whatnot. But here we go. We're going to talk about Sean Connery's fourth Bond film, Thunderball. I feel like I don't need to explain to you guys what this is. You know what it is. And I tried to get a couple of guests on this time. They all had other commitments, so it's just going to be a live stream by myself. We'll talk a bit about the film. I'll bring up a bunch of behind the scenes stuff, some of which I've not talked about before, and we'll just kind of do a general commentary of the thing. Feel free to type into the comments as you would like, and if you have any questions either related to the film or to other things, I'd be happy to do that. The film runs about 2 hours and 10 minutes, anyways, so I'm going to try to make it so that it's not dead space for a good chunk of the time. But anywho, if you want to watch with us, go ahead and skip past the menus, get everything through, go to timestamp 0 on your movie so that you can watch it. Otherwise, if you're listening to this as a commentary, well, just as like a commentary podcast sort of thing, well, thank you for doing so. All right, let's go ahead and get started with this. So if everybody would press play right now. There's nothing quite like sitting, waiting for the film to start and seeing the gun barrel dots go across. Lets you know you're watching the right thing. Many of you probably know this is the first Bond film to do kind of the true widescreen that we think about. The previous three films all shot, I think, in a 1:66 ratio, or it's a 1:85. I have to go back and look. But yeah, this is the first one to do the truly widescreen thing as we tend to think of. And I think it really helps with the cinematic feel of this film, gives it kind of a very glossy, epic feel to it, which I feel is appropriate. Not that the previous Bond films didn't have great landscape shots or anything like this, but this film really lives or dies partly on the appeal of the environment we get to go to with the Bahamas here. Although, of course, this opening sequence and quite a few of the opening of the film is in France. The telltale sign: women do not open their own car doors. Eighth Nickel, you're absolutely right. The previous three films, they had Bob Simmons shooting that, and it was in black and white. And so just by the change of the aspect ratio necessitated reshooting the gun barrel, and so Connery was finally able to step up and do it. Not that we've had another person do the gun barrel that wasn't an actor of Bond since then, but there is something kind of special about the Bob Simmons original, even if I do prefer Connery's over it. I watched Austin Powers as a kid before I watched Thunderball. And so you have the gag in the first film where Austin just keeps hitting a couple of women thinking that they're men. Now I know where that comes from, and it's doubly funny to me now. Yeah, this is indeed Bob Simmons doing the fight alongside with Connery. But like, I am really curious because I doubt Connery did all of this by himself. So I'm curious as to who the other stuntman would have been for this, or if Connery actually manned up and did it. That'd be awesome. Bob Simmons was really key to some of these early films, which is interesting because I don't think he was involved in From Rush with Love, if my memory serves me right. He did Doctor No and Goldfinger and Thunderball, and From Rush with Love to me has the best fight sequence in any of the Connery films. But the way Bob did a lot of his stunt sequences, it's one of those things. It's kind of like talking about Terrence Young or Maurice Binder that just they're so key to the feel of these early films. And of course, a jetpack, which comes out of nowhere, but it's so cool. So this was shot at Chateau d'Yonne, just outside Paris. And of course, they got two of the only certified men in the world to come uh, do this rocket belt stunt. The main one most people know is Bob Suter. And you know, Ross, to be fair, I don't think any good self-respecting man should be doing this without a helmet. Like, I know it's cooler, but there does come a time where safety has to take over with this. And I mean, Bond is a professional. I mean, he wears a helmet for the Halo jump. Nobody said anything about that. And I've said this before in a couple of other videos, but this title sequence is my absolute favorite of any of the early Connery films. Which is funny because conceptually it's very simple. It's kind of a one-trick pony through a lot of it, just floating in water, going between men in diving suits with the harpoons and the floating women. But it just looks so elegant. The movement with it, it reminds me a lot of From Rush with Love, where there was a lot of movement with that one too. And I've talked about this film as being basically the one-upsmanship kind of film, because Terrence Young comes back and he admitted part of it was his own pettiness of just, Guy Hamilton does such a great job on Goldfinger. I want to come back and show you how it's really done. And I suspect Maurice Binder wanted to do the same thing here because you had Robert Brownjohn, who did From Rush with Love and Goldfinger. And, the titles for Dr. No aren't bad, but it's obvious, it's a first time. We don't know what this is going to be. And so it feels out of place with the rest of the series, but you can't begrudge it that, your first time starting out, of course it's going to be different. Oh, that would be very nice. Yeah, because part of the reason, because the jetpack was originally designed for military warfare, and part of the reason it never took off, if pun intended there, was because the timing just the amount of fuel that it had, how much it burned up, that it just you could only go for a couple of minute flight. So I'm glad to see that that was refined to be a little bit longer. We'll see what Amazon MGM does with these new films. If they're going to keep going in a Craig direction, keep it more grounded, sort of a thing, which I think a lot of us, even those of us that like Craig, are a little tired of at this point. Let's go ahead and go back with the bombasticness. I just watched the new Fantastic Four movie the other day and really appreciated that we're not worried about realism here. Let's embrace the spirit of what these were. And I feel like that's an appropriate comparison since Fantastic Four was kind of came out late 50s, early 60s, part of the silver age of comics. And so I'm hoping that some of these Bond films, I don't necessarily want them to go back to the 50s and 60s. I know that's kind of a divisive issue right now, but but tone wise, can we get back to some of this tongue in cheekness? Does it bug anybody else that like the opening titles are done in a slightly different framed ratio than the rest of the film, and like the first shot usually after the titles still have like the black bars on the sides as opposed and also the tops? That just bugs me every time I do one of my videos and I have to bring up the sequences because it really jars when I jump from something in the middle of the film, go back to the titles. I can't unsee it. So Adolfo Celli, he had actually read the Thunderball book long before being cast, just around the time that Doctor No had happened, and he really enjoyed Thunderball and thought that that would be a fun film to act in, but he didn't think they would ever call him. Of course, they did. Um, though it is a little weird. I've heard some people even involved in the crew that consider Adolfo Celli to be miscast. I don't think that's necessarily the problem. I think Largo's fine. Um, and, being dubbed by Robert Rietti certainly helps bring out some of the menace in that performance. Sorry, I get distracted by Ken Adams' brilliant set design here. Um, no room in the world would ever actually look like this in terms of practicality. I don't care. It so visually represents Spectre. Um, just this kind of dark and cloistered order. There's a bit more refined. Uh, there's almost a futuristic quality to the thing. Kind of thinking like 50s and 60s sci-fi shows, and I really like that as a story idea. Um, being that Spectre kind of represents this new world order that's being imposed on the stolid rigidness of the British Empire, represented by Bond, and you'll see that later. If you do a visual comparison between Spectre's briefing room and the MI6 British Admiralty room, there's some very notable differences between them that invite that kind of comparison. There's something that John Barry did with this score that I really appreciate. He had about as much time to work on this as the others, and just in the '60s, that was his heyday. He kept getting hit after hit after hit with them, and I know some people have a problem with the wailing horns of this one, which is funny because when I think wailing horns, I think Goldfinger, but Thunderball certainly has a lot of that. But there's kind of a wonderful use of woodwinds and percussion throughout this thing that really gives it that underwater feel. And of course, I've been listening quite a bit to the new La La Land Records expansion, which presents the thing on 2 CDs and gives you just about everything that was that's in the film, as well as several really good alternate takes of things. And I never actually owned this score growing up. Thunderball, anything related to Thunderball was really tough for me to get, which kind of elevated the film for me. That it was like an unreachable thing for me. I remember the DVD, trying to buy that because I really wanted it on DVD rather than VHS because I wanted the widescreen ratio. It was $40 even on eBay back at the time, which to me in 2005 was an unreachable amount of money just for a single movie when I could just go down to the local video store and for $5 or so I could just get Thunderball that way. So that's what I did. Connery and Maxwell. At some point, I will get to doing a money penny ranking video, and at the risk of spoiling something for that list, I don't foresee that Lois Maxwell won't come in at number one. Particularly the banter between her and Connery is just electric, and it's great because she probably wasn't on set for more than a day and a half shooting most of these things. And I know her and Bernard Lee have talked about that they never, and even Desmond Llewellyn talked about they never really made money off of these films based off the paychecks they got, but certainly the recognition, like I've seen Bernard Lee in a few things from the 50s and 60s. I grew up watching the Disney version of Kidnapped, the tale from Robert Louis Stevenson, and I remember him being the captain of the ship in that one. But whenever people look at Bernard Lee or Lois Maxwell, all they can think about is Connery Bond. I've thought about splitting Lois Maxwell because 14 films in comparison to everybody else, it's kind of unfair. And there is a difference between how she interacts with Connery and Moore. I'm not going to split it up for Lazenby because Lazenby weirdly also had some really good chemistry with Lois Maxwell. So I'm just so if I were going to split them up, I would do the Calvin Dyson thing and just put those two together, and then Roger would be a separate one because I do like some of the warmth between her and Roger, but it's not the same thing. And speaking of good chemistry and flirting, the wonderful Molly Peters. This film does get a fair amount of flack, like a lot of the Connery films, for being more misogynistic, for being a little too aggressive with women. And timestamp for the film right now, I'm at 1440. So he's just kissing Molly Peters. She backs off. Anyway, where I was going with that. There's only one or two instances in the Connery films where I think that criticism is warranted, and weirdly, one of the most cited is in this film where he essentially blackmails her into having sex with him. That's not how I read that sequence, and I read it as these are two consenting adults. They know what they're doing. I don't think Bond would actually blackmail her into sex like that. Um, it's one of those if you take flirting too literally, it ruins the fun. And I mean, all the Bonds are charming in their own way. Connery just has this magnetic presence where, kind of like Brosnan, I would buy that if he walked into a room, that most every woman would cast a glance in his way. Okay, does anybody else think that this clock that he keeps looking at on the wall is the same from Goldfinger's plane with the little peephole that Miley looks through? I've always wondered about that, if it's a reuse of that. Yeah, this is a strange suspense sequence, but it's brief. I'll let it slide. I mean, I've never been stretched out like that. Maybe it is quite painful. I mean, he certainly looks like he's been through an ordeal. There is this idea that like Bond never sweats, he never bleeds. He absolutely does, and you can see the sweat in this film. I know these scenes really aren't that sexy shooting them. I mean, part of my job, I've been involved in plays and shows where you have more intimate scenes with actors, and it can be quite awkward. Um, it can be quite awkward filming this because you've got so many people watching this, and even when you're naked, you don't feel very sexy in it. It's part of the magic of movies. Uh, they're able to make this work. And I think of all the Connery Bond films, this and From Russia with Love are the ones that come to my mind as like the sexiest of the films. This one probably tops From Russia with Love. I think more intrigue and espionage with that. Yeah, if I thought this is what the chiropractor did, I'd probably not go to. Just kind of feels like schoolboy getting back at each other, sort of a thing. But I buy it. Well, thank you. I'm glad that you've been enjoying this so far. Thunderball, I think, is a fun movie to watch, even if it does get dull at a couple of points. But you just kind of take it as is. Not every film, and in fact, most films aren't complete gold throughout the whole thing. But I have such a good time watching Thunderball, which it kind of saddens me when I read retrospective reviews now and from some other Bond fans that really don't care for this one. I'm like, oh, that's such a shame. Sorry, I'm breaking the 12th commandment in which we do not talk over Fiona Volpe's intro. That point about the sexiness of the films, it's certainly helped by the leading women here. Uh, my goodness, this film has some really good ones throughout. And I remember growing up, because I started getting into Bond right about as I was going through puberty, and Domino Duval clicked a few things in my mind. Um, I'll talk more about her when we get to her. But Fiona Volpe wasn't too far behind. I have a thing for redheads. Okay, yeah, this is very obvious. Uh, double footage being composite, doing a composite here to make that work. But it was one thing as a kid that even though I noticed something odd with that footage, I never really thought that much about it. Good for you. It's not that I don't like Goldfinger. I like Goldfinger a lot, and it is comfortably in my top 10. But I am happy to start to hear that like there are some other people that are accepting of the fact that not everybody's going to put Goldfinger up as number one. Um, I think there are some things Thunderball does that are a little bit more to me as part of like the elusive quintessential Bond film. So th- not every time that I put in a Connery Bond film do I want to watch the top of the top. To me, Thunderball is the good. I just want to relax with Bond while he's on vacation, but still get enough to keep me interested throughout the whole thing. It has a right balance of fun and engaging with it without tipping too far into the laid back side that I think some people accuse the film of. I think if I were ever going to do fan edits of films, I don't think that's something I want to do. But if I were ever going to do a personal fan edit, I think the big thing I would look at is the underwater stuff, all of it. Because the problem to me is not that they have it or that they focus on it a whole bunch necessarily, because that is a big component of the original book. That's where a lot of the plot and the action takes place. I think they just linger on it too long. And it's weird because Peter Hunt is usually pretty good at inserting energy into the film through his editing. And I know he didn't have a lot of time on this film. In fact, he's the reason that the film was delayed from its original September, October release to December because he needed that extra time to edit the film. So it's weird to me that he doesn't have as much energy through the underwater sequences. Far be it from me to praise Never Say Never Again over this film. A lot of you know I do not care for that film. But one of the things I think it does better is the underwater sequences. They are not as drawn out. There's more purpose to them, and they aren't just there to take up ambiance through this thing. I think this film has a real problem with that. Yeah, and part of it too is that this whole setup to stealing the bombs. I mean, we already knew what they were going to do. It's fine to see it in action. I feel like we should be seeing some of that. Um, it does not need to show every single step of it uh, going through the whole thing. Like, him crashing the plane into the water to get it submerged. I think that goes on a little long. Certainly retrieving the bombs even after Duvall is killed and bringing them back to the Disco Volante, I think that takes a little long. This film also has a lot of coincidences in its plot. And one of the things I've never fully been able to wrap my head around, both in the book and in the two film versions, is that Bond just happens to be at a recuperation center right next to this military air base where this whole plot is going on. I think that's a pretty weak reason for Bond to already have knowledge of this plot before or have some exposure to this plot before he gets assigned the case. This music is wonderful. Switching the Body is one of my favorite tracks from the entire film. And yes, it was intentional to do that music short right before doing this. I already had some of the songs picked out, but the second that I got the score to Thunderball, I listened through it just to make sure, and I inserted one or two tracks. I think I just inserted one track from the new material that wasn't available before and put it into that video. But all the recordings there, excuse me, all the recordings there are from the new soundtrack. So they're as good as they've ever been. And this is one of the ones, if they were ever going to do a double disc vinyl release from La La Land Records, I think this is a good score to pick. Yeah, Ross, La La Land Records has done License to Kill. I was really excited about that because my three most requested scores would have been, or most desired scores would have been Spy Who Loved Me, Moonraker, and License to Kill. And they've done both Moonraker and License to Kill because both of those albums were really poor in the representation of that music. And License to Kill absolutely makes up for what we had to live with for 35 years. It's okay, Richard. I understand uh, where some people are coming from, that they think this film's boring. Um, you're not wrong in places. It could be sped up. But I also grew up watching David Lean films with my dad. He had a thing for Bridge on the River Kwai, and we watched Ten Commandments a whole bunch. I watched a fair amount of Cecil B. DeMille growing up, so I was kind of used to slower moving pictures anyway. So Thunderball's never bothered me with just the overall length of the film. This is the longest of the first of the. I think it's the longest of all the Connery official Bond films. It might be longer than Never Say Never Again, but I'd have to go back and look at it. Yeah, there's something about this film, even over the previous 3 films, which the previous 3 films still looked really good, for what they had to work with. There's some absolutely wonderful shots in them, but Thunderball just feels like a whole 'nother level, and I think part of that is because the budget was increased substantially, for this film. Doctor No was made for just about $1 million. From Russia with Love was $2 million. Goldfinger, I think, was $4 million, and this film ended up being about $9 million. Quite a jump up. And I really appreciate the work that Peter Lamont especially did on this film because he was one of the underlings to Ken Adam working on this, and he was the one that had to go out and do a lot of the research, particularly with the Vulcan bomber, with the nuclear weapons and whatnot, and the attention to detail in it. I never once questioned whether or not this is what these things actually looked like. And everything that I'm reading, there's some liberties taken, but it's fairly accurate to how a lot of these things would be constructed, how they would be built. Yeah, Chaotic Enigma. I've always been fascinated by the fact that they built a full size replica just to sink it, and most of what would make it recognizable is gone. It's just the framework now, and it's been taken over by a bunch of underwater life. It works essentially as a reef, but you can still go there in the Bahamas, and it's a popular diving spot. That whole area has been used for a whole bunch of movies. And when Never Say Never Again did their underwater sequence with the sharks, where Bond's swimming through um, and Barbara Carrera puts the tracker on him, that was about 200 feet away from the Vulcan bomber. Yeah, this is part of where I'm talking about. For those of you joining in with us, Derval's crashing the plane down into the water. This is one of those. I think it's so protracted, and I think the film even understands that too because they insert this very brief thing with the military just to give us something else to look at. That's part of the reason that I fully understand why they were so fascinated with this underwater stuff. I mean, there had been films that shot underwater before, but not on the scale of Thunderball. And it just felt like being in another world, which was so cool. And even to this day, like there are plenty of other films. Certainly, Bond is shot a lot underwater, um, and some of those have done the underwater stuff quite a bit better. I think Spy Who Loved Me and License to Kill are good examples of doing some underwater stuff better. For Your Eyes Only is a little hit and miss for me, particularly with the long submarine sequence. But Thunderball certainly, um, this would have been a delight to have seen, knowing the context of what other films came out that year. Thunderball was the third highest grossing film of 1965, and it only barely qualifies as a 1965 film because it came out here in the States like a week before the end of the year. It was a Christmas film um, by its release. The only two films to beat it that year, I think, I know Sound of Music was number one, and I'm trying to remember if it was Dr. Zhivago or Zulu. I think it was Dr. Zhivago that came out this year. Those two films beat Thunderball. And in terms of grosses, Thunderball made about $141 million, which was mind blowing at the time. And it wouldn't be until Live and Let Die that it would surpass it in terms of the nominal statistics. But adjusted for inflation, this is still one of the top three most profitable of Bond films. And I think in North America, even adjusted for inflation, North America grosses, it still beats Skyfall. So it's still the most profitable film here in the States, which kind of bugs me. I understand why they've gone ahead and done the 30th anniversary of GoldenEye. That makes a lot of sense to me. I still wish there was something for Thunderball. It might not be as popular now, but I mean, this was peak Bond mania. Dr. No was a pretty big success. From Rush with Love did even better. Goldfinger made it so that the next Bond film had an easy ride to the box office. It didn't have to be that great. Everybody would still have gone and seen it. And I think Thunderball doesn't necessarily coast on the Bond name the entire time. I think it still brings a couple of things to the table. But like this was when Bond was at the height of his powers. Yeah, I don't fully want to give it a pass, Richard, for just being, it was great in 1965. Because part of this is we don't live in 1965. We can't replicate that feeling exactly anymore. And the best films hold up then and they hold up now. And there are just going to be some things that it's not really the fault of the film, that it just doesn't hold up as much, but it's something you have to acknowledge that sometimes just things don't play as well today. I understand and acknowledge like Gone with the Wind and its status. I've seen that film a couple of times. I've read the original book. um, it's still got a lot of merit to it. I don't think the film is nearly as good as everybody says it is, particularly watching it now. There are a number of things that's just really hard to get past, that I'm surprised it got away with even at that time. But I fully acknowledge it was worthy of the status, the revered status that it had for years and years and years. And then there are other films that came out around that same time. Citizen Kane, to me, I admire that film more and more every time I see it. It's fairly simple now. Back then, it's certainly fantastic. But even today, it's funny. A lot of people of my generation, a little bit younger, have this revered status for Star Wars Episode 3, Revenge of the Sith, which I do not understand. And I was 12 when that film came out. I was the perfect age for that film. And Citizen Kane does a much better job of doing a story of a guy becoming the very thing he fought against. But then there are other great films. A fair amount of Hitchcock's films still play extremely well today. Doesn't matter that they were made in the 50s and 60s. Vertigo, Psycho, Rear Window, a lot of them play really well. And Thunderball, I'm sure played better in 1965 than it does today. I still think there are a number of things about this film that really, really hold up, particularly the score. It's hard to pick a favorite from John Barry for a lot of people. And this isn't even my favorite John Barry score for Bond. I think I'd still have to give that to Living Daylights, From Rush with Love, On Her Majesty's Secret Service. But when I think of Bond as done by John Barry, it's cues from Thunderball and Diamonds Are Forever that come to mind. Yeah, I've been dumping a lot of trivia and stuff on this because I doubt too many people are interested in, them putting the net over the Vulcan bomber here. This is one of those bits. Like all you needed was a shot or two. I think most of us would get it. But I don't need to see all of it. But it is kind of amazing, just thinking about this in universe as to how big of an operation this is, involving this many people, and the government never catches wind of it until it actually happens. Ross, I absolutely agree. I think it's Sith is the most competent of the prequels, but I kind of put them in about the same place with each other. I don't totally hate them, but I don't totally love them either. Um, Richard Lewis Gilbert directing this one. That might have been really interesting because part of the reason I like this film is what Terrence Young brings to the non-action scenes. I don't think Terrence Young was a great action director for these films anyway. I think Lewis Gilbert actually did a better job at a lot of his action sequences. But yeah, I'm really curious as to what Lewis Gilbert's version of Thunderball would have been like. And Guy Hamilton was offered to do this film a couple of times, and he turned it down for two reasons. One, but the underwater stuff, he's like, that just doesn't tickle my fancy. And the second was, he had just done Goldfinger, and he felt as though he was spent. He had thrown everything into that. No, like, okay, so I'm exaggerating a little bit. I do kind of understand the liking for Sith. I think a lot of his concept over execution to me, and I don't know. I've said my piece about Revenge of the Sith. I have a whole review on it. It's and that probably does it better than I can just do here off the cuff. But I also do think that if you have films that come afterwards that you really don't like, it tends to elevate your views of the films before. Um, that always happens with just franchises when you go through films. Uh, if you really didn't like the Craig films, suddenly the Brosnan films weren't quite as bad to you. If you grew up hating the Brosnan films, and I think that happened with Star Wars a lot because for years, Return of the Jedi had a bit of more mixed reception, and then when Phantom Menace came out, it was like, no, Return of the Jedi is one amazing, absolute favorite. I'm not saying this is true for everyone. I'm just saying general trends. If you have something that's worse after the thing, you tend to look at the thing before, just like, okay, that wasn't that bad. Yeah, Gareth, I am pretty convinced that if Amazon follows fan trends, we will get a second remake of Thunderball. And this is just not strong enough of a story, I think, that requires that many remakes. And I'm pretty convinced that Kevin McClory will be rolling in his grave if we do that. And in fact, that's kind of one of the big things I'm worried about with this idea of let's go back to the 50s and 60s and do more faithful adaptations of Fleming's works. There are a couple of them. I can understand the want for that, but there are several that I'm just like, I just really don't want to sit through another version of that story of that film. Majesty's Secret Service, as great as it is, we already had a pretty great film version last time. And even if you didn't like it, it's one of the more faithful ones. I don't think we need to see that one done again. From Rush with Love, kind of the same idea. Thunderball, I'm just like, what else can we do with this? I will agree, Richard, that Spy Who Loved Me is the epitome of everything that we think of when we think of Roger Moore, and that's probably him at his most confident. Moonraker's not too far behind. It's just kind of bogged down by the fact that, there's a lot of other stuff going on in Moonraker that people don't like, but like, there's a really solid Roger Moore film baked into that. No, Ross, you're absolutely right. It's just, we're always proven wrong. We think we've seen the worst, and then there's more. Favorite actor for the next Bond? My hopes are kind of dashed at this point, given the recent announcement that Denny's not going to start casting until after Dune 3, which fair enough. That's a big film. You want to focus your attention on that. And I mean, third films are really hard in trilogies to get those right, especially when you had two previous films that, regardless of whatever feelings we have about them, both Dune 1 and 2 were very successful. And it would be really nice to get a solid third film to close that one out. So younger Bond, all the options that have been presented to me of like the younger late 20s, early 30s Bonds, I haven't liked any of them. So I'm really hoping that Denny sticks to his guns and goes for kind of more of an unknown person. I understand that that's a bit of a risk. We could end up with another George Lazenby that kind of splits the fandom a little bit. But best case scenario, we get a Christopher Reeve, and we get somebody that is, for the general public, second only to Connery. But that tends to happen. I mean, Pierce was lauded in GoldenEye as the second best to Connery. When Craig came out, he was second best to Connery. It's a lot like that. Of the Bond series, my go-to karaoke song is probably "You Know My Name." But I did actually listen to a karaoke version of Thunderball the other day, just because I was such in a Thunderball mood. And this film, it's like Tomorrow Never Dies in that we were blessed with two, in my opinion, two really solid songs, which either one of them could have served as the great opening title song. And I'm so glad we have as much of Mr. Kiss Kiss Bang Bang throughout this film. It's one of my favorite tunes from the series that was never given its fair due to be the title song of the film. And so when I do a video on the alternate Bond songs, covering Surrender and the Pretender songs from the Living Daylights, I would be really surprised if Mr. Kiss Kiss Bang Bang wasn't in the top three. I would only want Cavill just because there's that kind of that lovely symmetry that he was the favorite to go. He was Martin Campbell's favorite for Casino Royale, and he was just too young. And I absolutely agree, he was too young for that part. And I've watched all the screen tests that got leaked within the last year. His was one of the more wooden ones to me, but I still would like him to do it because you know he's a fellow nerd. I love when somebody's invested in this, and we've had a couple of Bonds that are a little reticent to talk about their time as Bond, that feel like they want to distance themselves from it. Connery's a big example of that. That he's like, I don't want to be known for just Bond, and it almost came off as though he didn't like the role. I think Cavill would be greatly appreciative of the role, but I think he's too old at this point if they are indeed going for that younger thing. And before we all crap on the younger Bond idea, Lazenby was 29, Connery was 32 when he started these out. We could make that work, but I'm a little hesitant. I'm kind of a wait and see thing. Regé-Jean Page, that's a great choice, and I understand some people not wanting to whitewash the character, make him black. I'm like, as long as he's a citizen of the English Empire, coming from Britain or Scotland or Ireland or something like that, I can live with it. I think Regé-Jean Page is a solid choice. Okay, Ross. Right now we are at. She has two moles on the left thigh. That is part of my problem. There definitely is a difference between being 30 in the 60s and being 30 now. I don't know what that says about us as a society, Gareth, but I'm the same age as Connery was when he started this, and I so don't think I could pull off. I so can't pull off what he could do. And certainly, there's a maturity about him and the way he was presented in that film that, like, you don't think of him as 32. You think of him as somebody in his mid 30s, early 40s throughout this. It's kind of timeless how he looks there, and I can't imagine a lot of people that I know at 30 being able to pull off that same kind of maturity and sophistication and having that same kind of charisma. Because I think that's one thing you definitely need as a Bond actor, is to be able to portray yourself so that basically your reputation precedes you before you even walk into a room. That would be a fun idea, doing a video ranking the Bonds that almost were, but there are so many of them. Um, and every so often you hear another rumor of, like, this person was considered for Bond. If I would do it, I would limit it to be the top 10. I wouldn't do my extensive one of like 40 or 50 people. I'd probably just go my top 10 favorites that never got to be Bond. I think that would be a fun idea. Gareth, no, I don't think I could pull off a better Russian accent. The first role I ever did in high school, I had to put on a British accent and maintain it for the whole show, and that was just awful. But I had a dialect coach for that, and he was impressed with what I was able to do back then. But don't ask me to repeat it now. It's been 15, 16 years since I did that. Um, I lived for 2 years in Brazil and had to learn how to speak Portuguese. I was kind of mostly self-taught there. And I could never sell anybody on the idea that I was from Brazil. I I looked too American to them, and certainly as soon as I opened my mouth, everybody understood. Yeah, that's an American. I was never sold on the idea of Aaron Taylor Johnson, like, I didn't have anything against him personally. I just kept associating him with other roles, and it was kind of the Craig thing. He looked a little too different from what we normally do, but I have learned not to be so picky. What does it matter that he doesn't physically resemble some of the other actors? Um, it's always going to be hard with actors that you're familiar with stepping into the role of Bond, because it's one of those things. Having a big franchise character like this that so many people are familiar with, you kind of want Bond to step out of your collective consciousness of who that character is. Like, you don't even have to think about it. That is James Bond, and that's really hard to do. Um, and for a lot of people, I understand why they resort to Connery as being the best. Not only did he perform the role very, very well, but being the first to interpret that role, so much of what we think of as James Bond is just what Connery brought to it, and the other actors have built on top of that. So that it didn't matter if Sean Connery won Oscar after Oscar playing other roles, everybody would know him as Bond. He couldn't escape that. He was doomed to that association. But like, I was talking to somebody yesterday about William Shatner having the same thing with Captain Kirk. You kind of can't escape that, and if that's the only thing people know you from, then fine. At least people know you. Yeah, Lorenzo, David Niven. I would have been really curious to see him do Bond, 10 years earlier when they had started talking about doing it. Um, Casino Royale, I think, is a terrible film. It's very badly put together and whatnot, but I always stand by it that it has its values. And I've gotten some flack over the years just for including Casino Royale 67 and Never Say Never Again on most of my lists. And I have three reasons for why I'm doing it. One, to piss people off. That's just more of a joke reason. Second, because I feel like a lot of Bond fans don't include them, especially Bond YouTubers. They don't often include them or talk about them. And I feel like that's kind of a shame. I've never been one to let my dislike for a thing immediately disqualify it from being talked about. And the third reason is because I think Never Say Never Again and Casino Royale 67 have things that are worth discussing. And in some cases, they do elements better than some of the official films did, like Casino Royale 67. I think the set design in that is incredible. I think the score to it, Burt Bacharach, it's not at all like Bond, but it's a fantastic score. Yeah, and with a lot of people, they use the excuse of we're just going to do the Eon produce the official Bond films. Well, now that Eon is probably not even going to have their name on the next films with Amazon MGM, there's no reason not to include the unofficial films now. I can understand not including Casino Royale 67 because it is a different kind of film. It's not trying to do the same thing as the other films, so it feels a little awkward sometimes when like you're talking about how Never Say Never Again wants to be this particular kind of Bond film and Casino Royale is doing its own thing. Um, that said, so we can still talk about it. No, I agree. There are sometimes I'm in the mood for Casino Royale 67. It's way too long, so I do get bored with it afterwards. It overstays its welcome, but there are some genuinely good bits that like I go back and look at, and there's more than a few jokes that I do chuckle at. I mean, this week I've been working on the Bond Allies ranking video, which should be up next Friday, and that's one of the longer lists. I think I've got about 55 people on that list, and I was rewatching bits of Casino Royale 67 to figure out who should I include from that film, and of course you got to do Mathis. And his parting joke, um, where Peter Sellers asks him, you keep changing accents. That worries me. Yeah, worries me too. That's my kind of humor. I think that's so funny. No, absolutely, Lorenzo. Stand by your opinions. I like the brazenness that Connery had here. Brosnan does it a little bit in Tomorrow Never Dies, and Roger Moore does it in A View to a Kill, where he's teasing the villain the entire time through. It's not very good spy work, but I kind of like the arrogance sometimes that Bond can display, and it does make for a couple of good lines. And I love Chelly's reaction. Yeah, I've heard that before, that it's basically gonna rot your something of you if you keep ingesting the whole thing a whole bunch. And, you know, it can be a bit of a mixed bag. There are some candy I don't care for. I think we are getting a cameo from somebody here. Oh, no, you don't want to come up? Sorry, my dog just came in. She was getting very growly about not coming in to see. So maybe at some point when she allows me to pick her up, I'll show her off to you guys. It's a girl. Her name is Tessie. Yeah, so some of the stuffed animal things, those are things my wife picked up for years. Like if you do kind of a look behind me and scrutinize a little bit, you can figure out what books my wife likes, what things I brought to the table. I even have a Jedi Starfighter right there from episode 2. But this is my wife's office. It's not where I record and do the videos. I do that at a professional studio that I work at. Okay, we are at outside the casino. Timestamp is 54 minutes exactly. So Largo and Domino are going off for the evening. I love Mata Bond. She's my favorite woman of that film. Joanna Patet's having just way too much fun in that film. And so I can't help but enjoy it as well. Sure, there's a lot of films that just had so much potential that if they were executed a bit better, but there's kind of a charm to some of those 60s mad dash comedies. Some of them you can just tell that just it's a party with your friends, and I can go with that sometimes. You know, the other film that came out around that time from Charles K. Feldman, What's New Pussycat, that's not a great put together film either. I really enjoyed it. And I think it's got quite a few good things. I think it's a funny concept with Peter Sellers in it. If you haven't seen that, I would recommend it. It's a good time. And it's got a theme song by Tom Jones as well. So there's our tie in to Thunderball. Please excuse the squeaky toys from my dog. I always wondered if this was a callback to Dr. No, because Bond spends a bit of time in that film putting together kind of like detection devices to see if anybody's come into the room or whatnot. And this just feels like an evolution of that. Excuse me 1 minute. So here's my dog. Her name is Tessie. She just really wants to play right now. I might hand her back out to my wife.
Sorry.
Okay. Leiter's introduction in this film is really weird. No, thanks. I am quite in love with my dog too, but she she's a little attention starved. She feels, despite the fact that like I spend all my time with her when I'm off of work. She's accompanied me a lot when I'm sitting there watching films or playing games and research for these, and she'll snuggle with me while I'm doing that stuff, or I'll play with her. Yeah, chaotic enigma. It's something that you can only do in film, uh, at least at this time, film and television, so that you can use the visuals as part of your storytelling. Since you can't, Richard Maybaum talked about specifically with this film that Fleming has this kind of untranslatable quality about his writing. He'll go on for these very long descriptions about these wonderful places or Bond's inner monologue that you kind of can't do in film form in quite the same way. So you got to figure out a different way to do it. And I think Terrence Young was actually pretty keen, and I think it's best showcased in this film and Doctor No, about how to translate Fleming to screen. When I ever get around to doing a Bond film directors ranked, I imagine Terrence Young will come up pretty high. My least favorite lighter, Richard, is going to be John Terry. Norman Burton's the only other one that comes close, but it's not like this is a particularly inspired version. Rick Van Nutter of lighter. He probably looks the closest to how I imagine lighter in the books, but there's something about him that seems a little wooden throughout the whole thing. I think they just cast him based off of the looks. And the one interview I've seen with him talking about this film, that's pretty much what it is. Somebody pointed out that he looked exactly like Fleming described lighter in the books, and so they cast him. I also really hated this constant recasting of lighter. It hurts that he's in four of Connery's films, and he never felt like a true staple of the franchise to the general public because he just kept getting recast. And so for a lot of people, it was hard to keep him in their minds. I think Jack Lord had the best chance of being the iconic Felix Leiter for a lot of people, and he's one of my favorites. But not getting him back for Goldfinger, I understand there's a couple of conflicting stories about that. I wish they had been able to work that out because it would have helped. Yeah, I am a bit of a gamer. Not too much online gaming. I don't feel like I'm made of money, and I'm certainly not competitive enough to make a hand at that. But because my wife don't have kids, we just have a dog to spoil. I, the money that would have gone to paying for diapers and things like that, I get spent on games. And I've had some very generous family members that gifted me a PlayStation 5 and a Nintendo Switch, and I've had an Xbox for years, so I have all three major systems now. And just last night, I was replaying through some of the Tomb Raider games because I want to do a part two to the video that I already did, because I've now played the original six Tomb Raider games by Core Design, and I would like to talk about my experience playing those, having no nostalgia for them, and how I feel about them, especially in comparison to what they've done since. Ross, I think that's right. That just when an actor doesn't come back, you get three stories from three different people about what exactly happened, and I think there's a bit of truth to all of them. It's funny. So they brought Desmond Llewellyn out actually on location for a few weeks, and then they didn't end up doing his scenes out there. So they sent him back, and then ended up doing his scenes in the studio. So if you guys watched my fun facts about Bond video. That's Colonel Charles Rushon, uh, or Rushon. I've heard it pronounced both ways. That's sitting there on the table. Such a key part of making some of these things work. I mean, all the military stuff on this film, um, he was essential in helping to get that together. What's up, Cassie? Um, I will probably get that on Xbox just because that's where I have GoldenEye. I have a thing about when I have franchises, I'd like to keep them on the same platforms. And because 007 First Light will be the only other Bond game I have on modern systems, I don't have to do emulators or anything like that. When that comes out, I will definitely have material to talk about that. I don't know that I'm going to do anything live necessarily with that. I'll probably put together a kind of after the fact when I've got my thoughts together of the thing. But if people are interested in live stuff, I'll do a playthrough with it. I don't necessarily want to do a first playthrough because the first playthrough, you're backtracking a whole lot. You're trying to figure the thing out. I always get really embarrassed about some of that. Talking about Tomb Raider, the first game when I played through it, it took me about 14 or 15 hours to figure out the whole thing. Last night's playthrough, I did it in about 7 because I kind of knew where I was going, but I still got lost a couple of times. Yeah, I'm pretty convinced they probably would have blown up the bombs even after. I mean, in You Only Live Twice, um, you know, Blofeld tells Hans, "Go ahead and blow up the thing." Uh, Even afterward. So Spectre's an organization for chaos. Gareth, yeah, I absolutely believe that they will keep it up of whatever musician's popular at the time. I would like to us to be okay with bringing back some artists, giving them a second chance to do it. Because Shirley Bassey's great. I mean, she's the voice of the franchise for a lot of people musically. I would like to see us get some returning people. I just hope that they don't do a huge genre shift. I don't have any reason to think that they will do that. It seems like the people that they're getting for this film are very conscious of the legacy that they're trying to build off of. And I think one of the wrongest moves they could ever make would be to do the title theme in a completely different way. My worst fear, not that this would ever happen, but my worst fear is I go into a Bond film sometime in the future and it's a P. Diddy imitation doing it. I just feel that would be so wrong. That's true, but that's Blofeld in the books, Ross, that he returned the money. I'm not sure that I could buy these Blofelds doing that. Oh, absolutely. Uh, I want Kleiman to be doing it until he dies, just like Bender. Now, if I can ever just get over my hesitation, because when I've done Dissecting Bond, I went ahead and did one for GoldenEye 007 because that was a very easy one to put together. That was actually the fastest of all of them, despite the fact that it's one of the longest. It's like 35 minutes. I think I put that together in like 3 days. Um, but if if I get over my reluctance and get through this current projects that I'm doing, I would love to start doing the Bond video games that I'm familiar with, that I know very, very well, and do full on reviews for those. So that would include the most of the EA games, the most of the Craig games. Certainly, Agent Under Fire would be fun to talk about, but it's going to be a little tricky with the earlier Bond games because they don't have as great of emphasis on the story when they're not just movie adaptations. I think by the time I get to Everything or Nothing and From Rush with Love, there's more substance I can talk about with them. And certainly Bloodstone, I have a fair few things to talk about with that. But even still, some of these Bond films aren't thematically rich or anything like that, and I still talked about them just fine. So uh, I will share in the love of Agent Under Fire and Nightfire before too long. I think my biggest thing is just getting the footage. Okay, timestamp for people that are interested. We are at 1 hour, 7 minutes, and about 35 seconds. So we're with Bond finally meeting up with Fiona Volpe. Nightfire is a lot of fun. It's never been my favorite, but I've never disliked it. It's always a good time going through Nightfire. And certainly the multiplayer I played a lot of. When we had the GameCube, it was Super Smash Brothers and Nightfire that we kept going back to a lot. Yeah, John Barry's someone that likes to reuse thematic ideas throughout. And Eric Serra was criticized for doing that for GoldenEye, reusing a fair few ideas from Leon's the Professional, going through that. But John Barry, there's certainly a lot of bleed over with some of his projects. Like if you watch Raise the Titanic, which he did in 81, 82, somewhere in the late 70s, early 80s is when he did that. It was around the time they did Moonraker, and there's a lot of sonic semblance between those two scores. Yeah, if I can figure out how to do that for future watch parties, chaotic, so that you can see what's going on. I like what Gareth likes to do on Video Tasties and just having the uh, VHS in the background that's back far enough that it doesn't trip copyright bots. Yeah, if you guys join the Discord server, when we do watch parties there, we don't have to worry about that kind of stuff. So my buddy Paul is usually the one that gets the movie, and we stream it together so we can actually watch it together. Oh yeah, I had good fun playing Reloaded's multiplayer as well. I don't mind that it's based off of the Call of Duty engine too much. I do think my problems with Reloaded have more to do with design than they have to do with aping Call of Duty's engine. Well, Ross, the thing is here is that they need to find the bombs. It doesn't matter that Largo has the bombs. They don't know exactly where he's keeping them. Because it doesn't necessarily seem like a good idea to just be holding 2 nuclear bombs below your own house. So they got to chase up any leads. And this is Bond grasping at straws a lot through the film. I mean, him going after Domino rather than going out to Canada, that's a hunch uh, that Bond goes on. And there's no reason to suspect that his sister has anything to do with this plot until it's confirmed that she's only tangentially involved. So that's why I imagine they still go look out for the plane. They have to, it's the murder mystery thing. You have to start at the very last place that you know where they are at, and then work your way from there. So Kevin McClory actually wasn't as involved in this movie from the day-to-day production as you might think, but he certainly was very helpful in getting a lot of these locations. He was very familiar with the Bahamas and certainly had a lot of contacts they could use. One of the people that he had contacts with was a guy by the name of Huntington Hartford. Uh, you know, very wealthy man on the island, in the islands. Here's the catch, though, with Huntington. His sister was good friends with Ivor Bryce, and Ivor Bryce is a well-known friend of Ian Fleming, and his sister had to help pay for some of the legal fees because Ivor Bryce was caught up a bit in that lawsuit between McClory and Fleming over the rights to Thunderball. So Huntington and his sister kind of got distanced from each other a little bit. Yeah. If I do another watch party, I thought about doing a Veto a Kill because it too is celebrating an anniversary this year. Um, I'm thinking, depending on how the holidays go, maybe doing something for Majesties, because that's like the one outright Christmas film that we've got. No, I absolutely agree, Richard. This is a different way of doing a Bond story. And with the previous films, even if we knew what was going on, because from Rush with Love, we know what's going on there, that Bond is being duped through the whole thing. And somehow that's still able to maintain a tension in a way that this film doesn't quite do that with. And Goldfinger, we really don't know what's going on. And so we're following Bond as he's just kind of walking through and kind of stumbling across some of these things. That is a thing with these Connery films, that he's a little less actively engaged in moving the plot forward. He's just kind of there being manipulated by this organization. But even then, you can make that kind of a story work. And if you're not into the ambiance of this film, if you're not into just Connery being Connery, I imagine a lot of this film doesn't work for you. We did just get over my favorite bit of humor from the film. I think this is the funniest of all of Connery's films. Though You Only Live Twice has a couple of good zingers too. But this, where he does the skeet shooting with Largo, I laugh my butt off every time I watch that scene in isolation. And part of it is not just because of the quip that Bond makes, but because of the hilariously, definitely dubbed Shelley saying no. Because Robert Rietti's saying no, Shelley's definitely saying something different. I've had some fun just as I've been going through these films, and having to edit them, because sometimes you go frame by frame uh, over certain bits. And even after the 60s, there are some notoriously awful bits of dubbing. Um, One of them actually is in Tomorrow Never Dies. When you watch Pierce and Terry Hatcher together at the party, and they toast each other. He's like, to you, and she says, no, to the gun. Watch her lips as she says that. She is clearly not saying exactly that. Well, Gareth, you know you can always ask me to do Bond watch parties. I'm good with that. And, I prefer Dr. No, but if you want to do View a Kill, I mean, that's the main way that you'd get me to watch View a Kill is just doing it with a bunch of people. I wonder how people feel, those who are watching who care to comment. How do you feel about Domino being dubbed by Nikki Vandersill? Because it really does start to bug me when I watch a lot of these films back to back, that I hear the same voice over and over again. Nikki Vandersill is very talented, but she uses the same kind of performance for a lot of them. Oh yeah, where she says "I miss you." Uh, that's definitely an added voiceover to me. Acres, we did talk about that earlier in the stream, but right now, with the demographic that they're shooting at, the late 20s, early 30s Bond, there hasn't been a single person been offered forward that like I really loved. Um, so I'm hoping that Denny V is going to strike gold with getting a mostly unknown thing. I think worst case scenario we get a George Lazenby that splits the fandom. Best case scenario we get Christopher Reeve. I know dubbing was a big thing in the 60s. I mean, it's not just a Bond specific problem, but when I think of dubbing in this era, Bond is the first one that comes to mind because I think it has some of the more egregious examples where it's very obvious that somebody got dubbed. But that being said, dubbing's a hard thing to do even now with the digital technology that we have and how easy it is and the tools that we have to manipulate the voice. Because we do have tools as sound designers. We'll record the voiceover, and then there might be a couple of times where we have to move a consonant forward or backward or stuff. We have tools that we can do that. You don't want to do it too much because then it disrupts how natural it feels, but we can do that for certain spot things. It's still really tough to do it now, but to do it in this era when they were doing it in the 60s with the magnetic tape, these big heavy things, and you've got to be really precise about how you're doing it. Norman Wanstall's work in every one of these, I am just gobsmacked with how he's able to make it work, and particularly Goldfinger. To this day, there are people that don't know that Gert Frobe was dubbed because it just seems so natural. And that's something that I'm okay with using AI for. AI should help to make your job a little bit more efficient. It shouldn't replace it because you still need someone overseeing it to make sure that it works. But I think some of these things with AI, getting picture to audio, I think that can help. I just don't want to be doing just AI things, either voiceover or film. I think that's a bad idea. Yeah, when I think of the Sony Spider-Man villains films, I have yet to see Craven, so I can't pass any judgment on that. But it definitely distracted me with Madam Web, and I didn't need a whole bunch of people to point that out for me. It was stupid obvious. Yeah, kind of tangentially. I have a Master of Fine Arts in sound design, and my big basis has been more live theater. But the program where I got my master's, I did it in Kansas City, Missouri. It allowed me flexibility to go ahead and go find a whole bunch of other fields to get to try. So, except for video games, I have done sound design for just about everything um, in the entertainment industry that you can think of. I've done live musical shows. I have done big Shakespeare in the Park sort of a things. I've done musicals. I've done small dramas. I've done a film. I've done voiceover and commercial work. I've had a little bit of experience doing just about everything. Richard, that is something that I've wondered. How do we tackle that? Because Thunderball is the earliest film where we still have access to most of that stuff. Um, for Doctor No and for Rush with Love and for Goldfinger, it's a little trickier. I mean, Goldfinger, we still have a fair amount of stuff, but there are definitely some music cues we don't have. And I remember listening to or reading an interview from the people at La La Land Records. They really tried to find extra stuff for Goldfinger, and that album, if you haven't heard it, by the way, it's pretty much what we got before, just remastered. It sounds better than it ever has before. There's not a whole lot of new stuff to it. And for Mush with Love, that one's particularly frustrating to me because those are re-recordings of what was in the score. A lot of the time, they're not necessarily what was done in the film. And there's a couple that really bug me just as an audio guy. So there's the track with Bond and Tanya in bed together. If you actually put the track into an audio program and look at it, it's so very left heavy. Uh, it's so badly optimized for stereo that it bugs me. And then Dr. No, I think the album we got, there's some fun versions of those tracks, but there's so little of the actual film score that we're able to get. And it feels weird saying that because Dr. No is one of my least favorite scores. I'd still like to have it. Yeah, Ben Burt certainly inspired me a lot. I'm sorry, this gag with Bond giving the shoes to Fiona cracks me up every time. But yeah, Ben Burt certainly, because Star Wars was my first love in film. I appreciate a lot of what he did, um, just helping the industry go forward. Walter Murch is another favorite of mine. And if I recall correctly, there's always been sound people involved in these films, since the jazz singer, and even a little bit before that. But Walter Murch, I think, is the first person for film credited as a sound designer. Everybody else was dubbing editor or something like that. Like Norman Wanstall for these films, he's the sound guy for them, but he's credited in a lot of them as dubbing editor. Wild, you should be locked up in a cage. So they went through a number of drafts for this film, which is a little strange given that the book was originally intended as a film. And they did about 10 or so different versions of that story back when Fleming was working on it with Kevin McClory. And when they went into this film, Richard Maybaum still had to go through quite a bit. And they ended up bringing in John Hopkins, I think is the guy's name, to help do some polishes on this. And he had worked with Connery on another thing. But one of the ways in which it becomes obvious when you're reading through them is the names of the leading ladies are different. Uh, like Fiona here was known as Kelly, and they changed it to Italian to match the actress. And Domino Duval, her name was originally different. Just even in the original treatments, I think it was Joe something, Joe Petacci or something like that. And of course, for the film, it ended up being Domino Petacci, and then they changed it to Duval after they cast Claudine Auger to try to match her with French, which is hilarious given that Nikki Vanderstel ends up dubbing her anyways, so it feels like it doesn't even matter. Richard, I like to have things in stereo, but you can't suddenly extract things that weren't there. I think some of the stereo tracks, particularly with like the VHS films, they're pretty badly put together. Some of the VHS releases, not all of them, but some of them are pretty badly put together, and I would just prefer them to just stick with the mono tracks. Some of these later ones, they're doing very well at putting this together. Like I hear the 4K releases of the Connery films that we just got are pretty solid in how they've been able to extract from those mono stems and put them together. But again, I haven't seen those, so I can't tell you whether or not it's good. For the Blu-ray, sometimes I do stick on the mono version. And with this film, it's kind of fun because in some mono versions, they have different music tracks going behind these. Acres of this film, favorite set piece, probably the pre-titles, the fight at the chateau. But there are a lot of individual moments here too that like I love to highlight. I do love this dance that he's about to do with Fiona. We're running through the Junkanoo right now. This dance that he's about to do at the Kiss Kiss Club. That's one of my favorite moments of the film too. And by the way, I've never heard anybody point this out, and when I get to eventually reviewing Everything or Nothing, I will point it out in my review. Nobody's ever mentioned that the Kiss Kiss Club from that game, the name comes from this film. It's not just Mr. Kiss Kiss Bang Bang. Like when you actually see it, it calls it the Kiss Kiss Club. I never see any other Bond fan point that out, and I'm like, really? That like excited me as a kid. I knew where that was from. Yeah, this is one of 3 films where Bond is shot. And this was the only one for years. It wasn't until the Craig era that we actually had more Bond bleeding from being shot. Jock and the Sweden thing. I wondered about that. Like, if you actually put together all of the Bond women and their nationality, who would come out on top? I think France would have to be up there. There are so many French women in these films. But Sweden certainly comes to mind too. Nah, I'm not going to touch that, Richard. I am a Craig defender, and I understand. I even exaggerate some things with Craig too. That's not what he did to me, but I can't be blind. I am very aware of why people don't like the Craig films, and even I am. It's hit and miss with Craig with me. I think Casino Royale is my very favorite Bond film. Skyfall, I've grown to appreciate over the years. No Time to Die, I know some people that just vehemently hate everything that film has ever done. It is a travesty on everything that has ever happened on entertainment. I like it. I think it's fun. Quantum has dropped down a bit over the years for me. I used to like that one a lot more, but especially after doing the review of it, that dropped my opinion. And then Spectre is a strong candidate for my least favorite official Bond film. True. I got to go per capita here. It's kind of like being a millionaire in Wyoming, bumping up those stats. And it's funny that some people really don't care for what Craig did in those films, and I get it. They don't feel quite as unique as some of the earlier films. Craig is playing a particular type of Bond. It's a Bond that progresses over. There's a clear thing that you can track through his 5 films, which is kind of impressive. But it does mean that there's some inconsistency to it, and there are a couple of times where it feels like he's phoning it in. However, what Craig got in those films, what he got to do, is what a lot of the Bond actors wanted to do. Connery especially railed against the fact that he didn't think Bond films were particularly taxing for an actor. Um, and you can kind of tell by Goldfinger, he's starting to play less of a character and just playing more of himself in the role. And certainly Roger did that too. He was much more comfortable doing that than playing a true character. But even then, there is some differences between Bond and Connery, but particularly by You Only Live Twice, it's just Connery reacting through a lot of the film, and that can be still be entertaining. But it's very different than how he started out as. And the creative say Craig got in the films, the fact that he got to veto a fair few things. I mean, all Bond actors had a little bit of say, not as much as Craig did. Most of them would have killed to have been able to get the creative freedom Craig got with it. Whether Craig made the best use of it is up to everybody's interpretation. But what he wanted was what most of them wanted, with the possible exception of Roger Moore. He was just having fun. Well, yeah, Richard, if you didn't like the previous 3 films, why are you going to like the next one? I get that. Yeah, there's a lot of that. I've seen some other people that have that with Connery, where they put like Goldfinger at the top, they put Thunderball, You Only Live Twice in the middle, and then they put like Diamonds Are Forever at the very bottom. I know some people that really don't like Diamonds, and I have too much fun with that film. It's not great, but I have a good time with it. And part of it is just you embrace the ridiculousness, which I kind of hate that being done immediately after Majesties, but it's something I can roll with. The stuffy British people dissing Bond. All right, so now we're in part 2 of the helicopter searching for the Vulcan, and I swear they're wearing the same clothes. I wouldn't be surprised if there was a fair amount of material shot for this film that never made it in, because at times it does feel like this film is kind of hastily put together. There are a couple of things here I don't recall seeing in many of the other films, particularly with like how short certain insert shots are, and just little moments to help move the plot along. I wonder how much of that was reshoots and throwing things into here. I mean, even for the soundtrack album, they wanted the album so early. I think they wanted it in like September, and Barry hadn't even scored the last act of the film. So that's why Thunderball, the music album, there's nothing from the underwater battles towards the end or anything like that. That's pretty much it, Richard. I have to be in the right mood for Diamonds Are Forever. Man with the Golden Gun's a big one that I've got to be in the right mood for to enjoy that one. It's not one I can just throw in whenever. I'm just wondering how far that bullet can go down, though, with Lighter trying to keep the sharks off of him. This to me feels like a bit of a coincidence that a shark just happens to be trying to get through the net as Bond is looking for a place to get in. And I'm really curious about that too, because like, was the shark originally there when they put down the net, or has he just been kind of like stuck for a couple of days? I know I'm thinking too hard about it, but no. And of course, there's the often wondered thing with Never Say Never Again with the horse that goes over the side of the cliff. And I'm very grateful we now have better regulations with animals, but like, ugh. More underwater swimming. It is still just impressive to me, just the technical feat of being able to shoot underwater. Like I know now it's old hat sort of a thing, but like even just commercially available things, like I deal with a fair amount of GoPros, and those are waterproof to a certain depth. To have these very big, expensive film cameras be able to shoot at a pretty decent depth, that's impressive to me. and particularly in the 60s. We owe a lot to Rico Browning for getting a lot of this material. Okay, this is a very romantic idea, just being able to make love underwater. Talk to a lot of girls. This actually sounds like a very appealing thing. To me, you're in salt water and having to be down there that long to be able to do it. Uh, eh, it's not one of my favorite things. At least not one of my favorite things to think about. But I do love this image of all the bubbles coming up. Yeah, Heaven's Gate was actually far more influential in the movie making industry than people might give it credit for because it was notoriously costly production that did not make back all that much money. It had a very mixed reception. It was kind of a studio destroying kind of a film, at least for United Artists, and it's part of the reason that we ended up with MGM outright owning United Artists throughout the 80s and into the 90s and so often. So I'm not surprised that it was the catalyst for more anti-animal cruelty rules. There is a couple of those things that, like, if you notice across all the actors, some of them have some very weirdly specific things that happen in all of their films. And Connery certainly, a lot of Bond films actually end up with Bond making love to the woman near water or on top of water. You know, Golden Gun certainly does it. Spy Who Loved Me, For Your Eyes Only, Octopussy, View to a Kill is in a shower, so it's kind of adjacent. Like, keep track of these. It's kind of weird. And so that's what I thought it was so funny when I just came across that behind the scenes story of Roger Moore, and I kind of put two and two together and realized, wait, he gets drenched in every one of his films except for Golden Gun. Yep, Tomorrow Never Dies ends up with them in the on water. License to Kill. Die Another Day is near the water. It's not the same thing. And then, of course, Craig doesn't end really any of his films making love to the woman. The closest we get is he rides off into the sunset with Madeline, but you know that's in London. I do feel it's a little weird. Like, it looks really cool visually, but I feel it's a little weird for Connery to be wearing sunglasses here. Just like put them on casually. Skyfall doesn't end with Bond making love to a woman, and certainly not on the water. He does do it midway through the film with Severine. Okay, this always bugged me too, because the watch was supposed to have the Geiger counter, and then suddenly the camera has it too. Plausible, but I mean, it's not like Connery cries. Connery's Bond doesn't, like, he's empathetic, but he's not necessarily sympathetic, if that makes sense. That, like, he's not going to sit there and cry with the woman over the death of her brother. Maybe he does. I think product placement is much more likely. I think it's particularly strong to have Domino kill off Largo. It's something I wish they would have reminded themselves For Your Eyes Only, to give Melina more of a satisfying ending in that film. Because I'm fine with Columbo being the one to kill Christados, but like, you needed to have a moment where Melina makes a choice one way or the other, and it doesn't play like that. It just plays like Columbo solves it for them, takes the ish out of their hands. No, my problem with the Geiger counter thing is not that the camera has a Geiger counter, it's that that's not set up. It's set up that the watch has the Geiger counter. And I feel like if both of them are going to have a Geiger counter, Q's not usually one for redundancy in his gadgets. He usually doesn't have multiple gadgets that he gives to Bond that does the exact same thing. And the main thing about the camera was that he could take pictures underwater. And I'm like, okay, that's cool, especially if you can do it in the dark. I think that's my problem with it, rather than just the concept of a camera having a Geiger counter. Yeah, I agree with Lighter and you that just somehow almost everything looks good on Connery. My friend Paul and I certainly like the joke about the bathrobe that Connery wears at the beginning of Goldfinger. That he's about the only man that could ever pull that off, and even then, it's probably one of the least flattering bits of clothing he's ever worn. But it's not like I can make any of this stuff look better. I mean, I've worn a tux with an actual tux shirt for a lot of years and a bow tie. Every Bond actor looks better in it than me. Okay, I do love this blatant reuse of the insert shot of Connery coming out of the shadows, because we just had it like 2 minutes before. See what I mean? Like, we just put in a blatant insert bit just to keep like the action pulsing. So we just have a really small conversation between Leiter and Pinder and the other radio operator guy, just so that we know that they're informed on things. I don't need to see that. Yeah, I'm amazed that Bond can keep his disguise for this bit, because it's kind of very obvious he's scurrying out of place and trying not to draw attention to himself. Yeah, Never Say Never Again does that with Paula, combining her into a couple of different characters. And I think Pinder, I talk about this in the Ally video that's coming out next week. Pinder to me is one of the worst examples of a Bond ally, because he feels very superfluous to the story. That his role could have been combined with that of Paula Kaplan, and in Never Say Never Again, they kind of split his role over Nicole in that film. But I also think Nigel Smallfawcett is supposed to be a little bit of Pinder, just as his function in the story. And I won't talk much more about Nigel right now. I'll wait to let you guys see the video to see what I think of that guy. But this is a story that I think really could use a conciseness meter, just for filming these shots, filming all these actors, doing all these characters, sort of a thing. It really bugs me sometimes how Connery's films sometimes include people just for the sake of including people. That's probably how it would be in real life if we had done these like that. But the most egregious to me is You Only Live Twice, with having three major Bond women. There's no reason that Aki and Kissy couldn't have been combined. And if we had, she would have been one of the best Bond women. Generally, I like Peter Hunt's editing. It's just with this film, it's really weird because he's known for kind of speeding up his films. The previous three films are all under 2 hours. This has an additional 13 to 14 minutes over most of those. And it really feels like it's a different editor this time out. And Peter Hunt's directing in Majesty's Secret Service, I appreciate the performances he's able to bring out for that film, but I think the editing there is a little more atrocious than here. There are some moments that really don't work for me. And John Glenn's had a chance to do other films. I think Spy Who Loved Me and Moonraker are really well edited. But Majesty's very hit and miss for me. Well, the thing about that, Craig, about potentially doing it out to 3 hours, you need a strong enough of a story, or you need to have fascinating enough of characters to make that work. I don't know how you take a story like this that is at its core a very simple extortion plot and justify it being 3 hours long. And if you're going to give characters more development, you still need to make them concise. And if you're going to give them that kind of development, you need to have a personal conflict for Bond here. You need to give him some character development so that the other characters can play off of him. And since that was not the focus of Connery here at the time, I think making it 3 hours longer and giving more stuff to other characters might have made for a worse film. That's just my take on it. I don't know how you guys feel. I know Connery would have liked to have had more character development. Yeah, it's really weird. I think Never Say Never Again is better when you do the underwater sequences, but just about everything else. And it's not like Thunderball is a rip-roaring film that just captivates you every single second, or at least most of us, it doesn't. And yet, Never Say Never Again is one of 2 Bond films that I've ever actually fallen asleep to when I've just been watching it very, like in the early morning when I'm most awake. Yeah, I agree. If there was a film that I argue would have been benefited from being about Quantum of Solace length, it would be this one. And I still think you wouldn't have had to sacrifice any of your major components. I don't think you would have had to sacrifice much of your action. Uh, just conciseness. That's part of the reason I like doing scripted reviews over off the cuff camera things. You can tell as we're doing this commentary, like a lot of this is just me saying my thoughts out loud. I feel much more comfortable being able to just sit behind a computer and type it out for 7 or 8 pages and find exactly the right words to say what I am thinking. Okay, for those of you wanting another timestamp, we are at 1 hour and 50 minutes. We would have been wrapping up with Dr. No by about now. That should tell you something. But yeah, we are at Bond getting ready to signal Felix and crew where he is. This is one of the few scenes that I think really starts to elevate Largo. Because for a lot of the film, I don't think he's nearly as unique or as strong of a villain as he could have been. But doing these kind of torture sequences really help, and particularly with Domino, because she's the first of these kept women that we've had in these films where she longs for a better life and instantly is drawn to Bond because she feels like she can get that. And in Never Say Never Again, it's played as almost a very loving but quirky relationship, which never worked for me. That's part of the reason that I don't like Largo in that. I don't feel like he quite has the balls to match his menace that he's supposed to have, the craziness. I know it works for some people, but not for me. Largo, think in this film does a better job at that, and part of it is because Domino hates him. She was attracted to him, but now she's in a situation she can't escape without help. And I do think that's a valid point there. That coming off of Arik Goldfinger, it's always going to be incredibly hard. it's like with Batman. You come off of if you come off of Jack Nicholson as the Joker, that's going to be a tough act to follow. And I think Danny DeVito as the Penguin and Michelle Pfeiffer as Catwoman did really well. Dark Knight Rises certainly had this issue coming up. I think Tom Hardy's Bane is great, but he's no Heath Ledger. And the Bond films certainly have that a few times. Because note, when they do a really good villain, the next one's usually not as good. Because like you have Francisco Scaramanga in Man with the Golden Gun, one of the top awesome Bond villains. And then you have Stromberg, which Stromberg never worked for me as much as I would like him to. Then you had Hugo Drax, who I think is really fantastic. Next villain, not quite as good. Yeah, you just kind of had this hot and cold thing. You have Electric King in Brosnan, who I think is a wonderful villain. And then you get Gustav Graves, who is nobody's favorite villain. Yeah, Kim Basinger has never been an actress I've cared for that much. She's fine. I just haven't personally vibed with a lot of her stuff. And Domino, it feels to me, I reported it in the review that she was pretty much cast at the last minute because I remember reading a report somewhere. I haven't actually been able to find that report, so I may have unintentionally lied there. But it feels like she came in very last minute, very nervous, wasn't quite sure what to do with that film. Well, welcome, Zachary. Yeah, we've talked quite a bit about the cinematography here. It's been wonderful to be able to have it in this widescreen format. And even if this isn't one of my most engaging Bond watches, this is one I tend to put on to like a big screen when I get them. I bought a new 55-inch TV that was 4K about a month ago. I still have yet to put a Bond film on there because I haven't decided which one I want to do. But certainly one of the widescreen ones I'm looking at. Yeah, Isabella really could have had a really solid career had she decided to go that way, because she was certainly offered various parts, but she decided for personal reasons she wanted to do something else, and I really admire her for that. Tangential story, not related to Bond. I was at a comic convention yesterday, or day before yesterday, out in Salt Lake City. And I got to see a few actors and got some photos with them that I really wanted to for a long time. My wife was a particularly big fan of Ben Barnes, which, if you don't know Ben Barnes, he played Prince Caspian back in the day when they were doing the Narnia films. He's on Westworld. He's on Punisher. He's done quite a few things. And she got some autographs with him. We got a photo op with him. But we went to a panel where he talked a bit about his work, but he also talked about his music that he's doing now. And that was something that for him was very fulfilling to try to do, because he personally felt like he had a really good ride as an actor. He's still going to be doing that, but he wanted to expand a little bit. He only gets one life. It's his life to live. It's pretty much what he said. And so Isabella, I kind of feel, did the same thing. Just wanted to live her life on her terms. So that's great. Faye Dunaway's been talked about a lot. I've even read that she was considered as far back as Thunderball. I don't know how true that is, because there's a lot of people for Thunderball they were looking at. There was Julie Christie. Raquel Welch was actually hired to do Domino, but Zanuck over at Fox called in a favor with Cubby and let her go at the last minute. And so it was kind of a scramble to find somebody else. I think Faye Dunaway would have been a fabulous Bond woman. And had we not gotten, and had we lived in the alternate universe where we didn't get Maude Adams as Octopussy, I think Faye Dunaway would have killed it as Octopussy. She would have been wonderful. I was about half and half, Richard. I never had a Laserdisc growing up. We just had VHS, and we got DVD about 2002, 2003. And when I could get a Bond film on DVD, that's when I tried to do it, because I got into Bond after the special edition DVDs were out of print, so it was kind of hard to find them. And so some of the films I got and to watch in widescreen for the first time, like Spy Who Loved Me, I did that way. Living Daylights, I did that way, and that really helped with some of these films. But some of the earlier Connery films, like From Russia with Love and Thunderball and You Only Live Twice, I couldn't get those on DVD at the time, so I had to succumb to the VHS version. And there are still moments where I kind of have a flashback of like, because with the VHS you have the pan and scan, so the aspect ratio is different. And I remember certain shots where like it's all one shot in the widescreen version, but in the VHS they cut back between Bond and the other person and Bond and the other person. So the green smoke behind Bond here, as he uses this big Q device, that was originally supposed to be a smoke screen that they had as part of the sequence, and that bit got cut. But they liked the effects so much that they just said, you know what? When Bond uses this, there's smoke screen behind him. Zachary, I agree. It's one of my favorite things to look up when I'm doing the reviews or the videos, because I always do research for these things. Even if I know the film like the back of my hand, I still do some research and at least rewatch the film. And reading up on who almost got a lot of these roles would have been fun. Like for Scaramanga, it's well known that it was supposed to be Jack Palance, which, oh man, that's a fantastic choice to play Scaramanga. I love Christopher Lee, and I think I prefer him, but I would have loved to have seen Jack Palance do a Bond villain. Fair enough, Craig. You know, single shot with them walking in the hotel. Yeah. I haven't talked much about Ghostbusters on my channel. I probably need an excuse to do that. Especially because that's not a film I actually grew up with. I didn't watch it until much later. But it's one of those, like, if you grew up in the 80s, it was a staple. Yeah, very well known that Christopher Lee was actually related to Ian Fleming. They used to go golfing a couple of times. And it's just kind of like one of those many things that makes Christopher Lee just a perfect choice to do these. And even though Man with the Golden Gun is not one of Christopher Lee's most well-regarded films, he's always talked about very fondly about that film, that it was one of his favorite filming experiences. And I think that's so classy that just because it's not one that's going to necessarily be what most people cite as your best role, um, at least you remember your time with it and can talk very fondly about it. And I'm sure he had fun acting alongside Roger. I think they had even done a film together before that. Yeah, I go back and forth on Giancarlo. If he had not been in absolutely everything these days, kind of like Pedro Pascal, I wouldn't have minded him for a Bond villain. Um, I do wonder if we're going a bit overload with this. Yeah, I don't think I'm going to get to Ghostbusters this month. I've got a couple of other things on the horizon that I definitely want to get to. And I've never been a big Halloween fan. So, you know, if you're going to get a horror film from me, it's probably going to be one of those like indisputable classics. Because I've thought about talking about Psycho before. My favorite Audrey Hepburn movie is Wait Until Dark, which I'd love to talk about. Oh, and just some of this abuse with the sharks. Ow. It just kind of hurts me. Yet again about the next Bond. I'll just say we did discuss that earlier twice about next Bond. Bond villain. Uh, that's one of the things where you could put forth a lot of different ideas, and I think it would be really cool because I've talked about this before. The Bond villain is the area of all the casting requirements for Bond where you have the most freedom. Bond still kind of has to fit a certain mold. The Bond girl still kind of has to fit a certain mold. Villain, you could do just about anybody, and they would work, depending on what you do with the script or whatnot. You know, tall, short, any race you want, male or female, different identity. I don't care. You could do a whole bunch of things. Um, there are a couple I'd really love to see do it. I'd love to see Peter Dinklage try his hand at a Bond film. I think he could make a really cool villain. And I know he's done villains in the past. I think we are due for another female lead villain, though. I'd like to see that happen sometime in the near future. I mean, who knows? I haven't seen too many over the top things from Denny V. I'll give you that, Craig. But and I love Elliot Carver too. I would like to, like I said when we were beginning this film, I'd like to see more bombastic. I'd like to see us embrace not necessarily campy, but tongue in cheek again. And so if we had a villain that allows for a little bit more of that over the topness, not too much, but I would love to see that again. Zachary, I would have agreed with Kate Blanchett probably about 10 years ago. Nowadays, I think I still like Kate Blanchett, but I'm not sure if she'd be my pick. And I'm sure part of that is, having her play in Indiana Jones, very related to Bond. I actually thought she did a good job in that film. But part of me wonders if she were to play a Bond villain, if it would be too close to what she did with Irina Spalko there. And I'm not sure that I want to see exactly that again. I don't know. Maybe. I mean, Richard, it is really telling that, like, if you look at my Bond women or Bond villains videos, the women do tend to be higher. I'm not familiar with the one you're exactly talking about. I mean, obviously she did Thor, which she was fine in. She's not one of my favorite Marvel villains, but she looked like she was having a ball with it. Coletti, I might go with. Yeah. And here's where the dubbing becomes really obvious. Yeah, we're just at the end. And a very last minute turn from Coots that just baffles my mind. One of my favorite bits of just what the heck moments comes in this fight scene. You'll see an insert shot where there's a guy coming up from below with with champagne glasses or something like that. And I'm like, really? You didn't hear all the ruckus that was going on upstairs and you guys were going to celebrate? This guy just comes up. It'll be here in like a minute or so if you can make it through all of this choppy editing. Yeah, right here. It kills me. I know, right? And this feels so very sped up and a very chaotic sort of a thing. And this is where the deficits of Peter Hunt's editing really comes to me when I think about this sequence. And especially with the hilariously bad green screen front projection or rear projection on this thing. Like, I still think this is a far more exciting climax than some of the Bond films, but it's just so choppy. Well, Jockin, I really like Tiffany Case. That is my answer to that. Why are female redheads villains and not good Bond girls? That is my answer. But yeah, that's a taste issue. Yeah, I don't think anybody would say this is the best final fight of a Bond film. Even Bond goes, "Who's he?" And she doesn't even know who he is. That's how unimportant Coots is to this film, which is funny because he actually is important. This explosion was quite powerful. John Steers talks about it, that like 20, 30 miles away, they were rattling windows. I agree, Richard. That's one of my favorite points about Domino. I think Domino is actually character-wise the most interesting in terms of her journey through the film of any of the first five films. She's not my favorite Bond woman of that era. I still think Tanya has got interesting stuff going on. I love Honor Blackman. It's pussy galore, but I think Domino's the first time where I really felt like they were making a point with that character, that she actually has a journey and can be seen as a more fleshed out character. And I'm sure that was a conscious choice on their parts. Yeah, we don't even have an insert shot. We have so many insert shots throughout this whole film, which seem very weird. We don't even get one for Coots because screw Coots. I do love this sky hook. It makes no sense to me how to pick them up because, there were a bunch of boats in the area, but okay, it looks cool. And it's such a BA way to end the film. And of course, with the wonderful original James Bond theme, it's great. So yeah, that's Thunderball. Zachary, I hadn't heard that about this. I do know that there was a very long version of You Only Live Twice because Lewis Gilbert brought in his own editor that he liked working with, and she made a very long version of that film, and the producers weren't quite happy with that. So they ended up meeting Peter Hunt just by coincidence. He happened to be in Japan at the same time as they were, and they begged for him to come back and do You Only Live Twice. And his caveat was, "You got to let me direct the next film," because he was tired of editing other people's films. But there could have been a 3-hour version of Thunderball. I talked about earlier. I feel like there were a lot of cut scenes from this film that will just never see the light of day, which is a bit of a shame. I think Bond films need to show more of those deleted scenes. I'm dying to see the deleted scene for Quantum of Solace, which is the alternate ending with Mr. White. True. Whenever somebody talks about a very long version of a film, I always have to wonder, is that an assembled edit that was meant to be a possible contender for release, or is that just work print where they just gather all the footage together? Because especially in the last 3 or 4 years, as I've done more in editing, I've become very familiar with the process of what it takes to put this stuff together. And I've become more appreciative of how hard that is as a job, doing an editing on a film. Uh, Sorry to keep bringing up Revenge of the Sith, but it's the big one that always bugs me when people talk about that there's a 3-hour version of that film. Or a 4-hour version of that film, excuse me. There's a lot of people that talk about they want to see the 4-hour version of that film. I have no idea what they're talking about. I have seen fan edits that have made it a 4-hour film because they include episodes from one of the Clone Wars cartoons. But I do know that there was a 4-hour version of the film intended in the script writing stage at one point, and if you had all the scenes. But Lucas himself was the reason that we never got that, because he's an editor. And so he wants to make his films as concise as possible. He's very ruthless with his own films. There's a lot of deleted material for Revenge of the Sith um, that we don't even see. And part of the reason that those got cut out was because Lucas was worried about Anakin's turn to the dark side. He wanted to make that a little bit more emotionally impactful. And having all of the extra stuff really wouldn't do it. Yeah, I'd love to see some of the stuff cut from No Time to Die. I haven't heard too much of that. Quantum of Solace. Not that I think it's going to improve my relationship with the film, but I want to hear what Mark Forster says about that. If nothing else, to just hear him talk about his justifications for why he did certain things. I don't hate that film like some people do. I still just want to hear why he felt certain moments should be the way that they're done. And I know he wanted to edit his film like a bullet, which I think is a cool idea conceptually, but what that translates into is something that's even choppier than Thunderball at points. Hey, Mikey, sorry, you're joining us at the very end of it. Yeah, you've got about a 2-hour watch party to listen to afterwards. I'm very glad that you guys were able to join me here. I was hoping to get a couple of other guests, but that ended up not happening. But that's okay. I hope that you still found this entertaining enough as I rambled and listened off to a bunch of your comments so that we had more stuff to talk about. I did have more behind the scenes stuff I was thinking about talking about with Thunderball. I did a fair amount of research before going through this. And I just like interacting with you guys a lot. So to close this out, we'll just go ahead and just go through the comments. We'll turn this into kind of an Ask Me Anything before we wrap it, because there's been some Bond things that have come out. I am not a big live stream person. I'm not going to do a reaction video every time there's a new bit of Bond news. I would only do it if there's really substantial stuff. Like if we have a trailer, I might talk about that. I'm not planning on it. I'd much rather review the things in hindsight when I've had time to let my emotions cool, become a little bit more composed about it. Yeah, earlier drafts of script, Zachary, I've definitely read some early drafts of various things, and at some point I do want to get to doing a review style thing like I did with the Dissecting Bonds to talk about Dalton's unmade films and some of the concepts for Rogers and Pierce's films, because I think there's some interesting stuff we could still do there. And there's a lot of people already talking about Dalton's third film, tentatively titled Property of a Lady, and I would certainly talk about it too. I found the ideas for his fourth film more interesting, and I was so happy to read the outline for that, and I'd love to talk about that at some point. Okay, most forgettable Bond films, in my opinion. Geez, there's a lot of memorable ones. And I think every Bond film has merit, and I stand by that there's something I like from every one of the films. But if I got to talk more routine, just sort of in one ear and out the other out of a first viewing, I think Octopussy and A View to a Kill certainly stand as some of the more routine entries. I know for Living Daylights, a first time watching that might not necessarily be the most memorable Bond film. I love Living Daylights, but that was a relationship that had to grow with me over time. And some people talk about Tomorrow Never Dies and The World Is Not Enough as being very blasé. I don't get that for The World Is Not Enough. Just concept-wise, I think that's much more of an interesting film than most of them. But Tomorrow Never Dies, I understand where you're coming from. I think those are probably my most unmemorable Bond films, even if there's memorable stuff in them. And I'm a big fan of Octopussy. It's okay, Mikey. I understand. I did this at a different time than I normally do, but because my wife and I have something that we want to do this afternoon, it's all right. Yeah, some of the stuff for Quantum, it gets trippy. Some of the ideas that they originally had, even before they brought in Roger Mitchell to start directing the film, because they only knew that they wanted a sequel to Casino Royale. They had no idea what exactly that looked like. But there was some really odd stuff for a lot of the Bond films, and particularly one of the things I'd love to talk about is some of the Harry Saltzman ideas that he had for his films, because Tom Mankiewicz has talked about, Harry had a million different ideas for each of his films. There were some crazy ones. Like here for Thunderball, they had a different version of the pre-title sequence where it was still going to be the same kind of gag where Bond punches the guy pretending to be a girl, but it was a little bit more psychedelic, I think, how they put it together. I'm actually going to look that up and bring it up because I know exactly where I read that, so I can repeat to you exactly what it is. This is from Some Kind of Hero, which is the wonderful behind-the-scenes book that was done a few years ago on the Bond films. Scrolling through as I'm trying to find exactly what the bit was. Okay. Okay, here it is. Originally, the pre-title sequence was set in a Hong Kong Fantan parlor and had a girl dressed up as a peacock sitting in a cage. Bond follows her to her dressing room and then slugs her and revealing that she's a man in drag. Man, that's a weird idea. Just having a woman dressed as a peacock in a cage, just kind of performing there. That'd be weird. Yep, there's the elephant stampede for the man with the golden gun, which I'm just like, I just have visions of Octopussy with its safari sequence. I think that's, yeah. Try putting that and like the From Russia with Love confrontation with Red Grant and Bond back to back, and they're part of the same series. Feels weird. Yeah. Surprisingly, North Africa has been discussed for a lot of Bond things, and Bond has gone in there in several adventures, but like it took a while before we got there. I'm also a little surprised that we haven't done certain locations with Bond. I'd love him to do the Philippines at some point. I'd love us to go back to Japan, but not do Tokyo, but like do some of the northern areas, like um, closer to Sapporo. I think that's how you say it. I could be wrong. I'd love us to do some more stuff like that. Um, I think you could do a couple of interesting things out in the Caribbean islands again, but not necessarily the Bahamas. Australia seems like you could do a decent Bond adventure out there. And for the longest time, when I wrote my Bond fan script back when Casino Royale was coming out, I wrote this at 13, 14. I have no desire to show it to anybody. But I originally had Rome and Hawaii as the locations. And so this was long before Craig ever went there with Spectre. So I got really excited when they were finally doing Rome, because that seemed an obvious one to me, why they didn't do that. Yeah, No Time to Die is just so stuffed for its 3 hours. There isn't as many action scenes as you might think. It's about the standard amount of action scenes you have for a 2-hour Bond film. But there's a lot going on within that movie with its plot and whatnot. So I think adding the boat chase may have been a little too much, especially because it probably means that we would have lost out on the Forest Misty shootout, which is one of my action highlights of the film. But yeah, I would like them to go to some of these other locations and do stuff. Yeah. Um, okay, so I'll take one or two more questions, and then we'll go ahead and call it here. We've had a good morning, afternoon, discussing mostly Thunderball. Yeah, and Norway is an interesting um, place to go to, and would certainly give us a different vibe than previous Bond films. We always kind of do like this nighttime elegance for some areas, but when we started to get to the Craig films, we started to move away from that a bit more. And I think there's some really interesting visual locations. We don't do many travel log kinds of movies where we just are awed by what's here on natural Earth. We'd rather just go to man-made artificial cities, which is fine. there's a beauty to that, but like, what if we went to like really cool caves for Bond films again? What if we went to like great coastlines again? I'd love to see some of those. Okay, Mikey, No Time to Die. It's kind of stayed in about the same place for me. My recent viewings of Skyfall elevated that film just a bit for me. I appreciate it more on a thematic level. I'd probably still rather watch No Time to Die over Skyfall. I think No Time to Die is more viscerally entertaining at points, but I think Skyfall is the better film. No Time to Die still kind of sits. It's definitely not top 10 material for me, but it's not the bottom half of the list. It kind of sits in that mid tier to slightly upper half for me. It'd be hard to do. I don't plan on doing a re-ranking of the Bond films until we get another full-blown one out. So I'd have to go through the process again. I would be surprised if No Time to Die drops considerably, because while I do have issues with it, and some of my issues are your issues too, it hasn't soured me on it. Well, okay, so the areas for Casino Royale where they went to like Montenegro and stuff like that, that's part of that disputed area close to the Yugoslavia and what Montenegro is a fairly well-known city, but like for casual people, nobody never really heard of Montenegro, but of course they didn't shoot that there. I think they shot that all out in Prague, which would have been fine. But yeah, with Quantum of Solace, when you get to the Echo Hotel there at the end, that really reminds me of the observatory in GoldenEye, that it's just one of those man-made things that still lives out in nature and is just something that people just have never seen before, and it just awes you on that visual level. Yeah, Brett, I absolutely agree. The Body World, I had a chance to go to one of those exhibits, and I don't think I had the money to do it at that time, but I was really interested. Because I've done a few locations that Bond has done himself. I've done a couple of the experiences that he's done, but Body World is one of those things that doesn't feel like classic Bond to me, but that's part of what makes it work within Craig's world. It's different. And it's just a cool idea. I'm sorry that I never got a chance to do that. All right, last question. If somebody wants to go ahead and be the last question, and then we'll go ahead and cut it. Unless I've been talking too much, and in which case we can go ahead and cut it there. Because then otherwise, for this week, I have 3 more favorite tracks of Bond films that are coming out. Those are really fun to do, and they don't take that long. The Allies ranked video should be coming out this Friday, and that one's a longer form one. Just to remind people, I'm only doing the male allies for that one, because I've already done 2 very long form videos on the females, and most of the women count as Bond allies. I don't want to repeat myself too much for that. So it's just going to be the male allies this time, but I still had quite a few to go through, more than I anticipated. But it was fun, because some of them I will probably never talk about again unless I do watch parties for those specific films. So I hope that'll be interesting to some people. I don't expect it to do great numbers, because I feel like that's something only fans would care about to hear rather than the general public, but I still like doing them. If nothing else, than to just give me a chance to talk about the different incarnations of Felix Leiter, or Lieutenant Hip from The Man with the Golden Gun, which is not somebody I talk about a whole lot. No, this was great fun. I think I will go ahead and cut it off here. I hope you guys enjoyed that video. The next one's probably going to be non-Bond, because I got to give myself a little bit of sanity. Because even though it's like an hour or 2 for you guys to watch it sometimes, it's a couple of weeks of living with the thing. So usually by the time I get 2 or 3 Bond long form videos done, I've lived with it for about 2 months almost constantly. And so I kind of need a break from those things. So the next one's probably going to be a non-Bond thing. I haven't quite decided on what that is. I should probably get back to doing Star Wars stuff to keep going on those. But I promise there's more Bond stuff coming out, and I still have a long form character analysis or why Bond is still relevant kind of video. I'm kind of a little mad that Analyze Bond, this Mr. Bond, got to that topic before I did, because I was like, dang it, because I've written a script. I still need to edit that. That's probably going to be another one before the end of the year, because I promised that. Not sure when I'm going to do that. It's probably going to be soon, though. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. MP. Diamonds, it's not as good as Moonraker. I don't particularly enjoy it quite as much, but I mean, I do know a good few people that like it. It's not my least favorite of them. It's Calvin Dyson's least favorite. Um, it's just not going to be as good as Moonraker, and it's probably not going to be as good as From Russia with Love, which you're getting to. Yeah. Okay. Happy to help there, Craig. I'm glad you enjoy it. And Zach, at some point when I am looking forward to doing some other ideas, I'll talk about alternate castings. But there's still a few good ones I want to get to. I want to talk about the alternate songs. I want to talk about MQ and Moneypenny, because each of them deserve their own separate film, separate videos. I want to talk about the Dalton unmade films. We've got a few things to get to. All right, guys. So enjoy your Sunday, and I'm glad you could join me. Thanks.